Dear listeners, good morning and welcome to Comme d'Archi, the podcast that opens the doors to the fascinating world of architecture. For newcomers, let me introduce myself. I'm the spokesperson of Anne-Charlotte Depondt, PhD in History of Architecture, published author, head of a communication and development agency based in Paris, France, dedicated to architecture. Let's meet every week to discuss culture and architecture and learn how to look at projects through a context and diversity lens. Thank you for being with me today, and now it's time for talent.
Bienvenue dans Comme d'Archi.
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to our Comme d'Archi summer series dedicated to color. Today, let's talk about white. This is Esther, and I had the great pleasure of writing this episode on behalf of Anne-Charlotte. In the West, white is the color of purity, joy, and cleanliness. One can think of modern sanitary facilities, linens, and towels in hotels. How is it that a white sink is cleaner than a black one? But beyond sinks and bed linen, white is also wisdom, the divine, the aristocracy. In the East, and particularly in India, white represents peace, purity, and knowledge. It represents the Brahmin caste, which we talk about in our episode on blue and the city of Jodhpur. But it is also the color of mourning, so widows wear a white sari. In China, black ink on white paper is used for condolences. For all other occasions, red paper is preferred. White has been used in architecture for thousands of years. It is the color of marble and stone. The Greco-Roman temples and statues of divine white have long been the ideal, admirable architecture. It was only in the 19th century that their bright, even garish colors to our eyes were rediscovered. Another example is whitewash, which is best known as the preparatory layer for frescoes. It is made of lime, calcium chloride or salt, and water. It was therefore a very cheap white plaster. Of course, it had to be reapplied annually and it peeled easily, but it had the particularity of being disinfectant and of regulating the hygrometry. In 1848, in England, houses infected with typhus or influenza were painted in whitewash. In 1894, it was the plague-ridden districts of Hong Kong. Earlier, during the Anglican Reformation in the 16th century, churches used whitewash to cover the representations of saints as they were now considered impious. In architecture, white evokes modernism, the Bauhaus, Oscar Niemeyer in Brasilia, and Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier wrote in Le lait de chaux, la loi du Ripolin, "Every citizen is required to replace his hangings, damasks, wallpapers, and stencils with a pure layer of white ripolin." And yet, white, although favored by Le Corbusier, does not entirely cover his architectural works. It seems that he was inspired by his pictorial work to sculpt his volumes in color. He painted the shaded walls blue, the walls under the light were red. Some volumes were erased by a flat brown ochre color known as terre d'ombre. The polychromy thus balanced and hence the much sought-after white and made it possible to highlight or soften certain volumes, particularly in black and white photography. From the east to the west, from architecture to painting, let us also think of Kazimir Malevich, in particular the white square on a white background of 1918. Let us quote Kazimir Malevich. "I have pierced the blue shade of color restrictions. I have opened up into white. Comrades aviators, sail with me into the abyss, for I have erected the semaphores of suprematism. I overcame the blue lining of the sky, tore it out, placed the color inside the pocket thus formed, and tied a knot. Sail away! Before us lies the white and free abyss." In urban planning, white is mainly associated with the hygienic movement that emerged in 19th century Europe. The cities of the 18th and early 19th centuries were overturned by the Industrial Revolution. They were unhealthy, polluted, and characterized by a galloping excess of mortality. In L'épidémie de choléra de 1832 à Paris by Jacques Poulet, one can read, "Upper classes have manure thrown in front of their facade to protect themselves from the noise of the carriages. If it rains, the street is transformed into a blackish, stinking cesspool where one sinks up to their knees." But Paris was not only suffering from cholera. Tuberculosis was also taking hold in unsanitary housing. Doctors, engineers, and architects agreed. The city must change. First of all, the city must be ventilated. Planted boulevards, avenues, and parks were created. Air, water, and population flows must circulate. Drinking water and wastewater networks are installed. Rubbish bins are created. Unhealthy activities, slaughterhouses, tanneries, etc., must also be moved. Animals and cemeteries must be moved away. The hospital was perhaps one of the first to be transformed. It became a group of pavilions, sometimes spaced in a park reminiscent of garden cities. According to Jacques Depondt in 1785, the hospital should become a healing machine. In other words, the very architecture of the place should contribute to the patient's recovery. In 1861, the first sanatorium in France was built in the Pas-de-Calais. It was the Burke Maritime Hospital. Tuberculosis was treated there by exposure to air, light, and a natural environment far from the city. In 1867, in Barcelona, Ildefonso Cerda theorized progressive hygienic urbanism. In his plan for Barcelona, he designed open blocks with interior gardens. Air, light, and sun circulate in the dwellings. The architecture is scientific, medicinal. This plan was not implemented. In 1904, the International Congress on Sanitation and Health of the Home was held in Paris. The architecture was still inspired by hospital and sanatorium models. In 1912-1913, the architects Charles Sarrazin and Henri Sauvage built the first terraced or tiered building at 26 Rue Vavin in Paris. The tiered system allows for optimal ventilation and light for each flat. The hygienic design not only promotes ventilation and sunlight in the flats, but also regular sports activities for the occupants. Finally, the facade is covered with white Parisian metro tiles for impeccable cleanliness. Thank you, dear listeners. This was Esther for Anne-Charlotte. Let's meet again soon in a new Summer Comme d'Archi.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to tune in to our previous content on Instagram at Comme d'Archi Podcast. If you like it, make sure to promote the podcast by giving it 5 stars on Apple Podcast and adding a comment, or on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And don't forget to subscribe and listen to all of our episodes for free. See you soon, and until then, take care of yourself.